Hello my beautiful friends, and welcome back to our channel and the fourth video in our perfectionism planning series. Today's video is really exciting because I'm going to give you the cognitive distortions or thought errors that make up and hold up perfectionism programming. Now, I use these thought errors to define perfectionism because it gives my clients a way to move forward. Defining perfectionism this way means we have something tangible, measurable, graspable, something that we can point out, adjust, and make progress with. In this way, perfectionism is no longer this fluffy personality type, untouchable, unchangeable thing. And this structure really serves my analytical, ambitious, determined, overthinking clients. Less woo, less fluff, more actionable. And I'm very proud of this because I don't know anybody else who defines perfectionism in this way, by their thought patterns, by their thought errors, these cognitive distortions. It's the set of neural pathways that your brain is most efficient at and therefore defaults to, the path that it always wants to take. And those pathways are only efficient for your brain because they have been so well practiced. And by the same token, this is where we can take some power back in the situation. And as we practice, strengthen, reinforce these new pathways at the same time, the other old perfectionism programming neural pathways are getting deconditioned and less efficient. So we're simultaneously creating new programming, installing a new program to the system, and uninstalling the old program. So your perfectionism is just your perfectionism programming for the purposes of thought management. It's this set of archetypal perfectionism cognitive distortions, thought errors that your brain's practiced and it's gotten fantastic at. Let's talk about them. Let me run through the most typical ones that razz up all of this trouble. Now, I'm so excited to give you this, and I've made a PDF self-coaching guide for you guys to start to work on deprogramming your perfectionism programming. If these thought errors that we talk about sound pretty familiar and easy for your brain to go to. This is just the beginning of what we do in coaching. This is just building up your awareness of the thoughts that are going on in your mind. And you can make a lot of progress with this yourself. In coaching, we take this awareness even further. We look at how it's affecting your life right now, how it shows up in your life in different scenarios. We look anywhere from the results that you're creating and go backwards to the actions that made those results, to the feelings that drove those actions, all the way back to the thought that created that feeling. And the other thing you can do is look at one of these perfectionism programming thought errors. Notice what feeling it creates in your body. Most commonly, it's going to be something like frustration, fear, doubt, shame, defeated, hopeless. And then look at, from that feeling, what actions you take and what results it creates in that scenario where the thought comes up. There's a bit more information in the self-coaching guide, so check it out down below. You can download it yourself and do it in your own time. Let's have a look at these archetypal perfectionism cognitive distortions. We've actually talked about labeling throughout the last videos when we talk about the core injuries of perfectionism that bring up the perfectionism and perpetuate the perfectionism. It's in this core injury where we conflate, fuse and confuse our self-worth with our performance, achievements, what we do, our career, our success. So the definition of labeling is the assignment of your identity, character, or value based on a single attribute, event, or behavior. It's really an extreme version of overgeneralization, which we'll talk about later on. So that is an example of labeling. I didn't do good enough, so I'm not good enough. Other examples sound like that work wasn't efficient, so I am not an efficient person. That decision I made was imperfect, so I must be flawed. There's something flawed about me because I made that decision. I failed, so I am a failure. All or nothing thinking. So this cognitive distortion or thought error, I'm using those terms interchangeably, but a cognitive distortion is a subtype of a thought error. All or nothing thinking we've also talked about as the second core injury of perfectionism programming. It's when we say, I have flaws, or there was a flaw in my behavior and therefore I'm not good enough. Good enough is having no flaws. Not good enough is having any flaws. Good enough is being perfect. Not being perfect means you're not good enough. So you can probably see what we're doing here. It's this unwillingness or inability to see shades of grey. It's when we interpret the world in black and white categories, which we love to do. We love to put things in nice, tidy sealed boxes with simple labels. It makes us feel like we really know what's going on and we've got everything under control. We're creating false dichotomies here, this or that. It's also called dichotomous thinking or black and white thinking. Does this event or being or factor fit in the black box or the white box? It needs to go in one or the other. Other examples of this sound like our tendency to label things as good or bad, exceptional or terrible. When we decide, or our brain offers us a thought, there's no such thing as partial success. When we can't see what we're gaining in situations unless everything goes perfectly to plan, to our made up plan that we feel entitled to, then it must be a failure. Any mistake, any error, any flaw, regardless of the teaching or the growth or other benefits that it offered us or the world, it's got to fit in either good or bad. There is no in between. There is no concurrent success or win or gain when there is also a failure or mistake or error. Maximizing, catastrophizing, minimizing, and filtering. I group these ones together because while they're all a little bit different, they've really got a similar theme under them. So maximizing and minimizing is exaggerating or shrinking the importance of things or likelihood of things happening. Catastrophizing is exaggerating the impact of and the probability of something happening. Filtering is focusing on a single piece of negative information and ignoring the rest of the information. I think we can all see filtering in our lives. When you get 10 pieces of feedback, 9 of them are excellent. 1 of them has some areas for improvement in it. Filtering is when you only focus on that one. It looks like being preoccupied with criticism or any unfavorable feedback. I have a memory of this that's stuck in my mind when I was an intern and I went to this teaching on the run workshop where a part of our role is to be contributing to the ongoing education of our colleagues, peers, and our juniors. So I was a first year out doctor and I remember sitting in that meeting and one of the registrars who I looked up to and admired, and I just thought she had it all together. I thought she had every reason to be confident and unshakable, but she described this with quite a level of pain and stuckness, having difficulty in this situation where she got 9 pieces of good feedback and 1 piece of bad feedback. She noticed she was preoccupied with this bad piece of feedback and she could see that it was affecting her confidence, her trust in herself and her capabilities, and therefore her performance. There was this resounding collective nod and in the room. This is a room of junior and senior doctors and consultants, no less. This is very human. Maximizing might look like putting an exaggerated meaning or impact story onto that error or feedback. Disqualifying the positive. So this is slightly different. The individual has a direct, explicit offering, maybe even standalone offering of positive feedback or a positive experience, and they reject that outrightly by insisting that it doesn't count for some reason or another. So this might sound like, I only succeeded because I put so much effort in. I only got a good score because the test was easy. They only complimented me to make me feel good. They didn't criticize me because they didn't want me to feel bad. Overgeneralization. When we take one experience, event, feature, outcome, and we generalize it to an overall pattern or truth. This might sound like, I always say the wrong thing. I always make mistakes. I never work efficiently. I can never seem to get it right. Fortune telling is when we believe the outcomes of events to be inevitable or probable, rather than recognizing them as one of several possible outcomes. You'll see catastrophizing that we talked about before fits nicely into this too. Fortune telling sounds like, I will always be this way. I will never be good enough. I'll never get it. I'll never succeed. This is never going to work. For the next couple of thought areas, we're going to dip into some emotional arenas. And what I've realized with my clients is where we're in the overthinking side of things, very light on the ability to feel our emotions side of things. So these ones might be a bit more difficult for you too to recognize without some troubleshooting and support. Emotional reasoning. This is when something is believed true based solely on a feeling. A belief that our emotional state somehow exposes some truth or is a reflection of what's happening in reality. Now you're probably actually very familiar with this and you probably used and defended this in your life. It's when you talk about that gut feeling or when you say, I've got a bad feeling about that person, I've got a bad feeling about this. But your feelings, your emotions are related to the perception in your mind, your thoughts. And I think we can all recall a time where we are embarrassed, where we underestimated or misread somebody, where we had this bad feeling about them, but actually this unease or discomfort in our body has probably come from our own personal fears. Our fears, our thoughts about what we should be afraid of is not always representing probable or even possible harm. A quick way to think about this is comparing it to pain. So pain is a sensation, distinct from a feeling or emotion. A sensation is something that starts on the receiving end of our nerves, and our nerves convey that information to our brain. Chest tightness, shortness of breath. Feeling or emotion is something that starts in our brain, and our brain sends information down those nerve pathways. When I was in med school, we had a whole dedicated module on pain by one of the neuroscientists at my university. And in that we learned that pain is actually a conscious experience. Pain is created when a nerve ending senses actual or potential harm. And that nerve is designed to send that information up to the brain and say, ouch, your experience will be pain. And it works this way because we don't just want to know about actual pain as it's happening. We want to know early when there's potential harm, so that we can remove ourselves from the situation that will potentially cause harm. So the experience of pain does not necessarily represent harm or damage. It can just represent potential harm or damage, and that's going to be an imperfect, crude interpretation at times. Sometimes our nerve endings aren't going to be able to sense potential harm, they're going to miss it. And sometimes our nerve endings are going to sound the alarms on potential harm, and it'll be a misfire, it'll be wrong, it'll be a false alarm. So in coaching, I like to think about this as hurt versus harm. Sometimes discomfort in our body is representative of harm or actual damage, an actual threat to us. And sometimes discomfort is just hurt, a discomfort that doesn't cause any damage or harm to us. It's like a smoke alarm that's going off because you burnt your toast, but there's no fire. Being able to distinguish between hurt and harm means that you'll be able to move forwards in life towards your goals, pushing through the useful discomfort and without the unnecessary damage and deterioration from allowing actual harm and damage in the process. A little bit of a tangent there, but it's a really important concept that when you learn the difference between these in your body, you're going to move towards your goals and thrive instead of just surviving, just hanging on. So emotional reasoning sounds like, I feel it, therefore it must be true. I have no confidence in my abilities, therefore I must be incapable. I don't feel confident, therefore I'm not capable. I feel guilty, therefore I must be guilty in some way of something. Mood congruent memory bias. This is the tendency to more easily remember events that have congruence with one's current mood. So when you feel, for example, guilt, shame, embarrassment, your brain more easily finds other examples in your past instances or events where you felt the same. Have you ever felt that awful shame or embarrassment and then gone into a spiral, recalling all the other times, finding all the other evidence for when you felt the same? I liken this one to the nostalgia that you get with a certain smell. Smells can have the same effect on us. When you smell a smell, say from your childhood, from your grandparents' house, from your mum's cooking, from someone's perfume, and suddenly you can so easily recall and retrieve a memory so vividly too that was otherwise seemingly lost. Finally, the illusory truth effect. I like to finish with this one because it really ties everything together and it shows you how self-perpetuating and self-fulfilling these thought errors are. The illusory truth effect is when false information is repeated over and over. Then we often come to believe that it's true. The example of this here is when your brain constantly, consistently gives you these thought errors. You start to believe in your personal inadequacy and maybe even the basis for your hopelessness and worthlessness. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope going through these thought errors might bring up some awareness, help you recognize and maybe even start to organize your thought errors from the facts. There's a list of these cognitive distortions with examples in the Perfectionism Deprogramming Self-Coaching Guide. You can get it in the link below. Stay open and curious with this Perfectionism Programming series. You have nothing to lose and everything to gain, I promise. See you guys.